Yes, you can, there's plenty. Michelle, I see that you have the agenda right in front of you. I don't have it pulled up right now. What did we have on there first?
The community survey suggestions for categories. Yeah, for items from staff reps.
Okay, awesome. Did everyone and I'm pulling them now.
Okay,
There's
that's fine.
feedback, but did everyone have a chance to take a look at the list that Christina and Michelle had put together?
Did the document work for everyone that I shared?
I think you might have only shared it with me.
Okay, what you were doing the ones that it didn't work.
Oh, okay,
But that doesn't mean that it worked for everyone, so I will forward that.
okay. Thank you. Let me pull it up. And I know, do you all want to kind of walk through what you had, or do you just want us to look at it? You tell me how you would like to approach this.
Basically, we had a few categories based on the feedback we've gotten so far. We had a few categories that we all kind of mentioned last time. There was facilities, services, collection, digital collection, outreach, programming. And then there were some things like the more personnel stuff. So Michelle and I brainstormed company culture to take on those, to capture those things. And then this list that Pete has shared out that Michelle and I worked on is kind of just everything taken pretty literally, whether it's usable or not at this stage, and just categorizing it. So we still have some cleanup work to do, I think, with like what actually gets put under those categories as examples for people to say, hey, I care about that thing, or I don't care so much about that thing.
And did you feel like this list got hit on things that people might want to prioritize that were not included in the survey results? A little bit?
Think so?
Okay. So did everyone see the list? No,
I think it was-
no.
It
Okay.
made it to us, yeah. I just double checked in case I just told you.
Yeah, what's up?
Shall I print some copies? Or actually, I can print a copy. I'll photo. Are you sure?
Thank you. We will wait on the in-depth conversation until it's back. But thank you guys so much for your work. Like, it's nice to have it organized and so we can get it in that format.
So was our idea, like, these are like the entirety of the options that show, but people pick their like top three? Or are we gonna have them answer on every single one of these
What we had
buckets?
discussed last time, and I don't know if we had solidified this. What we had discussed was so we're talking specifically about the community survey. We
Yeah.
had talked about giving them the big categories. So anytime anybody went in to take it, they could select from, what are the things that are most important. If they care the most about the space, they might pick facilities. They might pick, I don't know if on programming, we want to break it down into like youth, teen, and adults. So they might pick like 3 of those categories as their priorities, and then they would be asked underneath that to reprioritize the things. So if they picked,
Yeah, I was curious if the mechanics part where we were gonna have them limited to pick your top 3. I know we had also discussed like someone might find all of these things important and want to weigh in because we just didn't want people to feel forced to have to
Yeah.
prioritize things that didn't matter to them at all and kind of skew the results. So I didn't know if we landed somewhere.
so I think it will all be in the instructions, how we want to state the instructions. If we use SurveyMonkey, like you can check as many as you want and do all of the routing within the questions. So like whatever you checked, you'll be able to move on to. But we can say like, select your top 3 or more.
Okay, I just didn't know where we landed. Not,
I don't have like a firm, we decided this 100%.
gotcha.
If you have a spare one, but wait, is that still, okay, yep, nice, perfect. Thank you. Can I get a copy?
Signature, I said.
Yeah. Hmm? Um. So taking a look at this, like it looks like How are we thinking of company culture as being a part of a community survey?
My recollection was that we didn't want to include that with the community portion, that we were gonna kind of get that information in.
Internally?
Yeah, it just didn't feel right, because so many of these things are things that are really important to the staff.
Yes.
And, patrons might, or, survey takers might not have all the context. I think it would be disheartening to deprioritize company culture when there are things that are important.
That we could include it in the plan as the library would be a place where people would want to work and,
Yeah.
Maybe some of these things can get rolled into.
And I don't think this is saying like we can't have a organizational culture section of the plan. It probably just wouldn't be as much for community feedback.
right.
Is
I
what we
would,
really
yeah,
want.
as a user, I wouldn't rank that. I'd say I want.
You wouldn't
my
like-
collection is taken care of, I have the programs.
I want my staff paid well, like that's not your, I mean, that'd be great if that's how they prioritize it.
You can do with any of this, what we
Yeah.
want to. Yeah.
We just-
So it feels like facilities or space or however we want to state that is obviously one of the main categories. I'm just trying to think in terms of like general language, what most people would latch onto. Programming is obviously another one. Services. Collection and digital collection. Would we want to pull those two together?
That's kind of what you had said.
Yeah, that was my suggestion. Was it because there's so little in the digital collection, it might just make sense to group them together.
And I might advocate for like breaking that out even more too, because there's other, this is also because I'm a heavy audiobook user, but like I want more audiobooks, whereas other people might care more about like magazines on Hoopla or something too. But
Because I think in terms of when we're asking people what they value with the collection, one of those like entry level questions is, do you prefer print or digital? And that might inform some of the things that they might want to give feedback on.
It might be in another section, but for under the collection bucket as well, would we want to include like, some library, or we have like the library of things, like, is there more library of things items that people are looking for, or like programs? Because I know we don't do it, but other libraries do the seed program or something like that.
Or spice libraries.
Yeah, would that fall under collection?
I think so.
Okay, because that'd be interesting.
Yeah, all of these,
People might not even know we do
we
that.
definitely need like additions and rephrasing of things. So that might be something like collection, and you would say, as an example, like more alternative things to check out or something.
Yeah, like i.e. blah, 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 blah.
That one's a tough one to explain in plain English, because I go to like non-traditional, but people might not know
Right,
what that means.
Yeah, you'd probably want to get.
non-book items or something.
Right, yeah.
And I think a little bit of this wordsmithing, all these responses came from people that have somewhat of a base of knowledge about libraries, so it probably needs a little wordsmithing for the people that aren't as entrenched in the back end of libraries. So if we are, oh, one other question here. Is outreach a service or is outreach its own category?
Internally, we treat outreach as its own thing, but we're talking to one of the experts. Michelle, what do
Okay.
you think?
That's, I think,
It's
it's
like both.
it's both, I think. We do, it is part of our services and it is also, it's kind of its own thing, because I would treat literacy volunteers almost as an outreach that's not really a service. We provide a building space for them for training and for classes, but we're not overtly involved in that. So it's just kind of not really anything we program
It's
with.
like a partnership.
Yes, it's more of a part, that's a good term.
Yeah,
So it is,
But one might say like, oh, I would love to see the library out and about more, like at my da-da-da-da-da,
Yeah.
in which case it's its own thing, I think.
or a bookmobile or a.
yeah. Maybe what I'm doing is struggling a little bit with the language on like whether outreach is something like the community is going to think of as separate, or whether or not they're going to want to take those pieces of outreach that we already do or that we might do and lump them under other categories. Like, because I noticed there's one thing under services already, this in-home instruction for seniors. I would think of that as sort of an outreach function. That may not actually be how it's happening within the library, but I would think of that as sort of outreach. Maybe I'm approaching this incorrectly.
No, because I think it does come down to, again, like the plain English, so that people want to know what outreach means, because some of the things that we've already mentioned are kind of like a partnership, but I don't want to dissuade survey respondents from being like, oh, I don't know what I'm asking for, where it fits. So maybe fewer categories is better. We just put outreach under services, and that's the question is about services.
Does that feel dismissive of what outreach is doing to lump it under something else?
I don't think so.
Okay.
Because in a lot of ways, I think a lot of what we do is that, we do book deliveries. That's reaching out. We do book talks. All of those things. Passports. Book come to the library.
And oftentimes we think of outreach as we're providing library service. It's just where are we providing it? So it's still under the service umbrella. It's just the location changes.
Would we want to categorize the internal and external services? Would that be helpful at all? Like, would people want to prioritize internal versus external? Since some of these things under services are external technically.
Like you're thinking like book delivery, that's.
Delivery,
Yeah.
yeah, passes to other places,
Mhm. Yeah,
I like that.
yeah, like along those lines, even if we don't call it internal, external, it could be in library, outside library.
Yeah.
'Cause it's,
Because I don't know if I wasn't more knowledgeable of the library, that outreach would mean anything to me.
right.
So if we're trying to make it more, the wording more accessible, I would word it like that, maybe.
Services in the library, services outside the
Yeah.
library.
Yeah.
Because that is a question that I'd love to get at with the survey responses is, are we prioritizing bringing people in, or are we prioritizing going to the people? Because, we have to balance that.
I guess it's a catch-22, depends what they answer.
Right.
We can't say which one until they answer.
Mike, did you have something?
Well, I'm just, I'm thinking again, and, it looks like we have, depending on how we split things out, if, outreach gets come out of services, or we do inside and outside services, or other, we've only got like 4 or 5 major categories. So it's not that many categories we're asking people to choose from. And I was thinking about, I don't know exactly how many, what the breakdown when we get our final long-range plan. But, I'm thinking of other libraries' long-range plans that I've looked at just to kind of try and get a sense of what other libraries are doing. And they tend, most of these are pretty broad categories. Like I can't imagine we're not going to have something that's about this facilities category on there that's about the use of our space or use of the facility. I can't imagine we're not going to have something that has to do with programming in some, way. I can't imagine we're not going to have something that has to do with, services. So it makes me wonder if maybe it's less important to have people prioritize the big categories, because probably we're going to have something from all of the major categories reflected in the plan. And it's more getting the ranking within the categories, so maybe it's kind of, I don't know how to do this in a survey, but you know, rather than asking people to choose their favorite of these big broad categories, which is kind of hard, you know, like, you know, to just in the abstract of these big categories to kind of do, it would be just to tell people, you know, rank at least one and it's, or, you know, up to, you know, 5 or whatever of these categories, you know, whichever ones are most important to you, choose at least one and rank within that category. If you want to do more, you can do more. And then we just go from there. And hopefully people that, you know, really only care about 1 or 2 things will only rank those and won't bother about the other ones or whatever, but rather than.
I think we could put logic in. I don't, granted, I haven't worked in Google Forms to create this, but I think it could be done. The logic could be that people can have access to all 4 of the categories. But if it's one that they truly just don't have any interest in, maybe they could just, maybe the very first question answer is just like, I'm not interested in this at all. And then they don't have to answer anything else.
I think that you have to answer in the affirmative. And I mean, SurveyMonkey has a lot more features than Google
That's what I'm
surveys.
saying.
So yeah, but I think you have to answer in the affirmative to use skip logic. So like you would have to select something that you want to talk about in order to move forward. Like saying no interest
Well, so say
is
we
going to push you onto a distinct question. I think.
Yeah, I just didn't know if it would just kill the workflow at that point. Like, are, you know, are you interested in library programming? Maybe not. And they just go, no, and it's just, they're done with that section, goes to the next section.
Oh, I see what you mean. Yes, that's possible.
Because
Certainly.
I think before when we wanted people to kind of like prioritize some of the sections, we thought we were gonna have more buckets of categories. And since this is kind of refining down to like 4 major ones, maybe 5, depending if we split out internal, external services, then that way people don't feel, they don't throw the results by prioritizing things that they don't care about. And we just give people the option to just do all 4 or 5 areas. And just the logic ends there. Like, you know, is library programming important to you? No, done with that section.
Yeah.
We now go to services.
I think that's a very valid idea and might figure the record out. Sorry, were you waiting for me to validate you? No, I think that that could very much work. And I think what would help it out is if in our brief introduction, we explain there are 5 categories we're going to ask you about. If you're not interested, you just hit no and it'll take you on to the next. You know what I mean? Because the only thing about that piece that's overwhelming to some people is if they don't know what's coming at them next. Like, but I think if we just tell them.
So I don't know which is better. I think that's a good way to do it. You know, just give them a choice to kind of opt out of ranking that particular category if it's not something they care about. That might work. So we give them each of them and just say, do you care about this? Either rank stuff or just say it's not that important to me and move on or whatever.
Yeah.
Another way is we could kind of give them the categories up front with a kind of a brief kind of description of the, just something that kind of describes the category. We give them the 4 or the 5 categories or whatever it is with just check boxes and tell them choose, 1 or more of these that are important to you. They check whichever boxes they want to check, and then we just give them a page for the ones that they checked to rank those, and the ones they didn't check, they don't see.
Either way works, I think.
I think-
Let me try building.
Either,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just 2 different ways of presenting it, but either way, it's like only making them rank the ones they want to rank and giving them a choice from the other,
Yeah, if you can make it clean like that, that'd be cool. If not, then we can just put in the instructions, like, hey, you're like a little blurb, you're gonna be asked about blah, 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 blah. If something's not important to you, just and I'll take you to the next category, yeah. Again, I have not made a lot of surveys in Google. I've done
Google can do that. I don't know if Google can do that.
I don't
I
know.
think last time we
Something
figured out
happened.
that it could do skip logic.
Yes, we did,
It can do skip logic, but it's pretty basic.
yeah.
Let me see. You guys can keep on talking. I'm just checking to see what happens.
I think the other area where we're going to see people who have things they feel very passionately about is the separation between adult services, services for kids, be it or however we want to divide that. And that's reflected in some of the initial survey answers, like programming specifically shouted out teen and adult. But you'll find, like with library patrons, there are people who are like, oh, I never use the library, but I'm here every week with my kids. So they might care passionately about our kids collection, kids programming. But if we ask them, like, do you care about programming? And they're like, well, I don't care about it for me, so they might just, it's something to consider, just that people will feel passionately about, especially youth services. So, I mean, I know we've kind of got like 4 to 5 buckets. I don't know if we want to break any of them up further by being like services, youth, or programming, youth. Because again, the people who don't care will want to just skip right over it.
Yeah. The services listed on this sheet
Mhm.
are for the most part they're
General.
general.
Yeah.
The
And
programming and the collection pieces, those might get more, what were you gonna say, Christina?
These again are just what people had put.
Uh-huh.
I just took all your sheets and kind of just categorized, but I think as a group, we might be like, oh, what these things are actually telling us is this, and then we rephrase it. So it's like missing some things in that respect, but we didn't want to add anything before we talked about it as a group. We didn't want to just throw things on there.
No.
Yeah.
Are we considering collecting any demographic data with this survey as well or no?
What would we use it for?
I mean, the way I would see it is like, if for some reason we have like 70% of the people that are like 50 and plus saying that they want this versus like younger people, like, saying it's not interesting, it doesn't mean that there's not a large group of people that find something valuable, even if they're not the overwhelming amount of the responders. Like, say we have mostly younger responders, but all 10 of the people 50 plus that answered wanted one thing. Would we want to address that, or would we deprioritize it compared to like 100 20-year-olds saying that they want more anime book clubs, like scrap the knitting club because that only got 10 yeses and this other thing got 100, The marketer in me is.
And I work with a data analyst who would say, do not gather demographic data unless you have like a specific purpose that you're going to use it for, because it will deter people from filling out a survey. I understand the value in what you're saying and it makes total sense. I don't know that we're gonna have a response I don't know that we're gonna get enough responses that we can even break it out. So you need to have 10% in any one category that you're defining in order to break it out, even for like our group's consumption, because we go online. So like, unless there's 10%, we can't even say it's over 50-year-olds. Like, just best practices wise. But I don't know if we'll see big jumps in categories. Like, I don't know.
I was thinking less of the categorization, because again, I don't know that our response rate is going to show us those trends. I was looking at it as more knowing if we were getting an over sampling of certain demographics and being like, okay, well, when I did a survey like this at Arlington Public Library, we asked for demographic data. And then we were like, oh, we disproportionately heard from people in these zip codes in this age range. And that just kind of helped us to reprioritize who we were trying to reach with the survey. That might be more complex than what we need here. So that's the value I see in asking for demographic data. And if we offer people an opt-out, how many are just going to take it and be like, no, thanks,
How does everyone else feel?
I have sort of mixed feelings. I think that if you don't get it, you'll wish that you did get something, and you'll say, oh, we invested all this time in collecting some information. Why don't we get this? But at the same point in time, if you don't have, I just don't, I'm trying to, as I listen to the discussion, I just can't really figure out practically how you're going to use it, given these categories here.
Yeah, I think it's a little tough to, it's tough to predict ahead of time, like, so, I mean, there's two different uses of the demographics. What Pete was talking about, that, you know, if you did it that way, you can collect the demographics, you don't have to tie the demographics to any particular survey answer, you're just finding out, you know, compared to the community, like, who are we hearing from here, but, you know, you're not tying it to a particular answer. If we are tying it to an answer, then we can kind of get a sense if there's particular demographics that care more about certain, you know, things than others that might help us prioritize. But without being able to kind of, I'm not sure, you know, to what extent we can kind of predict beforehand, like, how are we going to use that data? You know, if, you know, what is kind of sufficient if we see, you know, if the survey's kind of if just the generalized results are pointing us in one direction, but we have some subgroup that seems to really like that, like, what's enough for us to kind of take that into account and kind of, you know, elevate that or prioritize it, even if it's a minority view, because it represents a distinct constituency. And if we don't kind of have a plan or how we're going to take that into consideration beforehand, then it kind of becomes a little, you know, ad hoc afterward, where you know, kind of people go, well, you know, I care about this, so I'm going to say, well, there's these people, you know, that's, you know, it's a little manipulable, and, you know, it's kind of not really, you know, if we want the survey to be a little more neutral, unless we can kind of define ahead of time what we consider to be significant, you know, subgroups, you know, things, it's a little hard to know how to use that. I don't know.
I think shorter would be easier for people, more palatable for people to complete. So if the survey itself is shorter, they can plow through it.
What would be helpful is just that broad category, who responded and gave us their view. You know, did we completely miss the young people's?
That's what I'm worried about, is we don't know who's answering it all. It could be all 10-year-olds growing up, you know what I mean? Like, a lot likely, but I mean, would we want to plan the entire library's trajectory and goals based off of only one primary group's
I think we're probably
input?
your older people and kids, that's just the way these things tend to skew, I think, but I think we should.
But I think that that would be a lesson learned, so then the next time we do it, we know we missed these groups, and how can we try to get that in front of them the next time? So this might not be demographics that help us in this current situation, but going forward, we can say, hey, and our goals for the next time we hit the long range plan is, we didn't get any feedback from any 20-year-olds at all. Like, how do we get a survey and their feedback in front of them? Do we post this at like colleges? Do we post this somewhere else, you know? Or just giving us something to reflect on. It might not tie directly to the answers, but it might also help us in future iterations of this do better when we approach this.
So would the goal then be solely to shape it in the future, but not to respond?
I think we have I think we get the data, and it might be helpful now and it might not, but I don't see that it would have no use whatsoever. I mean, you think we might not have a lot of answers, but even at a tiny school, we at one point wanted demographics for the kids that were attending our school to try to accomplish something. And I had to dig through every single file individually and try to compile information, because it hadn't been done, like when they registered and put into a system to like track. So I forgot what it was, what we were trying to do, but I remember sitting on the floor and going through every single person's file individually and trying to find like parents, jobs, and like, I don't know, stuff like that. Like, how many have one parent, two, something like that. So if it's not a ton of questions, I don't think it doesn't add a ton more time, and people can always opt out if they're really like opposed to giving it to us. But it might be good at the very least just to find age categories potentially, and or I don't know, one or two other pieces of information that are helpful.
I would feel most comfortable if we were going to include any demographic information with telling them exactly what we're going to do with it. So like the open-ended part is probably my concern. Like, I would want to say, we are using this demographic information to make sure we have a representative sample from the community. It will not be tied to any answers. But like, to be clear, instead of having like an open-ended response, like we don't know what we're going to do with this until we get it, that would make me feel more comfortable about asking for it, is just saying like, we're trying to get a representative sample, but I don't know. I mean, I think that I'm over analyzing this just because of what my life outside this room is, but I just don't want to deter anybody.
I've done like a million surveys and I don't think being asked my age ever deterred me from clicking the button. And if it really did, I would just say like, I don't care to provide that at this
Yeah.
time, and that's it. I think it will be something we wish we had done. Even just to say, to make this better for the next time around. And I think that's a good goal for that. We want to make sure we are hearing from folks.
Yeah, I'm comfortable with, as you framed it, like, we're just doing this to make sure we're hearing from the entire community.
I will follow up like with the handbook and such and make sure that it's okay that we ask it as a publicly funded organization that isn't running this through anybody to confirm that our survey is okay, that it's fine that we asked graphic information. Because we can always then, we can, if we have a little bit, you know, we can compare that back to what the 2020 census stuff is for Guilderland and see like, here's who we did and didn't hit. How are we sending this out? How are we communicating this to people? Like, I think I'm gonna ask like 4 questions at once, but obviously this can go out in the library newsletter, it can go out on the library social media, it can be sent in an email to library contacts, but that doesn't hit non-library users. How are we getting the survey out to the rest of the community that doesn't currently use the library?
So we should probably be, and we have a start on this already, but there should be a list of community partners, Chamber of Commerce, neighborhood associations. And we should just start with a place of, these are the folks who we know we can reach out for, and then maybe we could do a little bit of thinking about who are we missing? Because I'm sure like between several of us in the room, we know like somebody at the school, somebody at the chamber. But like I only know the people at McCownville neighborhood association, so I've not met any of the other neighborhood associations yet.
I was gonna ask if the neighborhood associations could like could do some good for us and say, hey, at our meeting, like at their meetings, I should say, hey, guys, you should fill this out. And in the staff, so we've been doing staff program surveys. After every program, we've been giving everybody a quick survey to be like, did you like the program? What other programs would you like to see? Guilderland, I think cares about like what area specifically they're from. So there's a lot of, they don't write, I'm from Guilderland, like McCownville. So you can get connections with each neighborhood association. That would help.
What other active neighborhood associations? are
Maybe
there?
it's just,
It might just be McCownville.
I'm like, I don't think I have an active neighborhood association.
Westmere, maybe. I think some
Mike,
people
you're in my
from
neighborhood. Do we have an
Westmere.
active neighborhood association?
Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I mean.
Like, I think we're Winding Brook is our, like,
Like,
but I don't know like how it all breaks down. Like Guilderland Center, like, do they have I don't know.
Neighborhood Association. If they do, they have not reached out to us.
Yeah.
Altamont, do the Altamont patrons do this survey as well? We technically serve that.
We do.
Yeah. I would say
Joe
that.
send this out too.
We can have Joe send it to his, and then we're gonna get an overabundance of Altamont people, like Altamont specifically is gonna be overrepresented, but.
That might be something to ask them. It's like, do you, even though you live in Guilderland, do you use GPL, the Altamont Library?
So,
I guess, well, that's a question. So, we've got this ranking of, the different, priorities and all that stuff. And then we talked about maybe having some demographic information at the end. Do we also want questions that are about their current use of the library? Things about how often do you go to the library? Do you ever go to the library? Do you use other libraries? Do we want to collect that information? I don't know that what we would use it for exactly. It's not kind of directly aimed at this.
But
Survey.
if you're putting this effort into
Yeah.
getting non-library users, it would be helpful to know that how many responses did you get from the non-library?
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a big unknown effort.
Just trying to see if I can find the neighborhood links, but yes, I do think like we can ask a quick check all kind of thing about what do you know, in the last, how long ago do we want to know? In the last year, what do we want? Month, 5 years? Have you used these things? Like, how long back do we want to like look back
Last year, you know.
in the last year?
Yeah.
Have you been inside the library? Have you checked out a physical book? You know, like we can ask. There's kind of like a checklist. Or do we need more information than that?
Cards are good for 3 years.
See-
You have to renew every 3 years in the system, correct? So if we set 3, which gives us about 2022 when people were really starting to, and people have moved into the area, renewed their cards. Is 3 too far back? Is that too many?
I wonder if the average survey responder would remember. Like, I don't know. In our case, like this is probably the only time we could say this, but we could be like, have you visited the library since it reopened post renovation? Because that almost syncs up with 3 years. But I would just be concerned that if we ask for anything more than a year, people are gonna be like, who remembers?
Or we can just ask frequency.
Yeah.
You go weekly, monthly, once a year,
Yeah,
never.
well, you could be, you know,
That's
if we wanted to ask, you know, say we use a year, you know, like in the past year, how often have you, you know, been to the library? Never, you know, less than 5 times, you know, roughly monthly, weekly, you know, multiple times a week. I don't know what it would be, but some kind of thing like that, when people check.
Daily. When you get 2 people in your daily. I think some level of frequency is good to know because it kind of separates out like this is a library power user versus a casual user.
Or not.
And what do we consider use of the library?
Borrowing a book, attending a program, physically coming are like the top 3 I could think of.
So we're not going to count checking out electronic materials or using a database that can be accessed outside the building?
So I would count that too.
You would
Yeah,
count
I
that?
Because they're using it.
Do we ask these separately? I don't know, I'm just trying to think. So I guess the question is, is this like we were talking about possibly with the demographic information that we're not attaching this to their answers, we're just collecting this just to kind of see what our coverage is between frequent library attendees and, you know, people who don't usually use the library, that kind of thing? Or are we connecting this with the answers so we could break it out separately and say, well, these are the things that people who don't actually come to the library say they would, you know, care about or would like to, you know, these are the things that people who actually come here a lot care more about. Do we want to do that? Because, you know,
You read my mind. That's what I would have asked. Like, what are we going to do with it? But
I think the things that Mike raised were probably 2 good data points we would want to get. It would tell us why people don't come to the library and give us maybe a basis for understanding why, and what could bring them in.
Mhm.
And then the people who are our most dedicated users, here's the things that irritate them. Most, you know, that they finally, why did somebody do this, you know? I think that those 2 bookends on this would be very helpful. I don't know, I've never designed a survey before, so I don't know how difficult it is to link demographics with all this stuff. I just can imagine.
to link, like, I mean, we can separate out the responses however we want. It's whether or not we can actually use it, whether or not there's enough like representative pool from any one area to use it to analyze the data.
and there'll probably be a good number of people who skip that question. Like, right?
I don't know about that.
Maybe
Yeah,
not.
I'm not sure.
Maybe not.
Usually when I start a survey, I go through it, beginning to end. So that's my data.
I mean, I do think we have to be conscious of how long it is and tell people approximately how much time it will take to complete. If we use SurveyMonkey, it gives you that estimate and it adjusts that estimate as people take it.
I mean, it might just be good enough to just ask frequency, and I think people will equate that to anything having to do with the library without getting too nitpicky. You could just say, how often have you been inside or utilized the library services? That's it, daily, weekly, monthly, annually, and that never,
Some come in and just check their email and they leave.
Mhm.
Some just read the newspapers and they leave. Some
Yeah.
print, fax, email, and then tax forms.
But I think that's,
Almost over.
I think that's to the point,
Yeah.
right?
And actually, that's not bad, because that'll easily separate out our, frequent
buckets.
users versus people who seldom or never use.
I
whatever.
think daily, weekly can be one bucket, just so we don't end up with
Yeah.
5.
Yep.
Because that's a power user. And then monthly, annually is the mid, and then never is and then we end up with the 3. So I think breaking it out into 5 or 6 buckets of people is too many. So we do daily, weekly, monthly, annually, never. And there you go. So on our end, it's easy to digest that information. We end up
Would you be okay with doing monthly and annually as separate? Because I think that that's a pretty big jump.
yeah, that's fine.
Yeah, I might do, like lump together never or like less than 5 times a year or something, or just a very small number of times. I mean,
So annually and never maybe together?
yeah, something like that.
Once a year.
Yeah, and I can look, there's, obviously like predictive language can tell us like what the best
Yeah.
way to say that is, but. So we're committed to asking about library usage and defining what we mean by that, and that includes digital resources as well. Or do we want those to be 2 separate categories? What actually happens in the building and what happens outside of the building, sort of like how we're looking at services.
I don't think that makes that big.
Okay.
They use the library, whether they're here or they use it, but they're using what it,
Yeah, I think just lump it all together, just as, we can explain like how often do you use the library? This includes, coming in person, taking up, books, using online, resources or electronic borrowing, or I don't know, however I'm going to describe it. Just kind of sum it all up and then how often, and then give them whatever the choices are.
Are we comfortable with that?
Yeah.
Putting a big fat star next to it, one thing down. What other demographic information do we want other demographic information? Is it important to us?
So a couple that we touched on that I think are important are age buckets of some sort. Like we don't need to be super granular and be like, hi, I'm Pete, I'm 42, but age buckets. And then I think neighborhood bucket is important.
I don't even know what neighborhood I live in, and I've lived here for almost 8 years. So like, I don't even know how to answer that.
Yeah.
And I feel like I feel like that's the only neighborhood that like really has an identity.
Maybe also Westmere though.
Westmere? Maybe I'm in Westmere.
I don't,
Do you see a neighborhood in that, Christina?
but two areas, yes, they have an identity. Nobody else really
Maybe
does.
not
I don't know
anybody else.
what they would, if you put down my Fort Hunter, I don't know how many people know they live in Fort Hunter.
Yeah.
I think to the people it matters to, it matters a lot. For the people that it doesn't matter to, they're like, I don't even know a neighborhood I'm in.
Gilderland.
Someone's in trouble. Neighborhoods and hamlets, those are our Guilderland Center, Altamont, Dunsville, Fort Hunter, Fuller's, Guilderland Hamlet, Hartman Corners, McCormick's. Like this is, yeah,
That's a terror.
yeah, I don't know which one of those I live in, so. Okay. So is,
I mean, there's more we could do, but I think
Which
the
is- I
two that
mean,
we have are
like-
like probably the most important.
is what age and,
What age, I would
The age
definitely,
of
I
free
think,
bus
I mean, age, especially since we have youth services and teen, things and whatever, and I'm sure that we'll see some differences in usage, when you break it out by age. Just, I'd be shocked if we didn't, but we could have asked something that has to do with, like, do you live in a household with minor children or something like that, just to distinguish kind of, because that probably will. I don't know exactly what's the right way to ask it, but I think we'd probably see some different results if we broke it out by, like families with kids versus others. I don't know.
are we asking children to take the survey?
I don't see why not. We have the age. I mean, I don't know, which,
I mean, I'm just asking a question. Like, who are we communicating this to? Are we?
I don't know, if we get a ton of results from, a whole slew of elementary school kids coming and taking the survey and picking their priorities and everything, and that drowns out
So it does get more difficult to gather demographic data when we are gathering it on a minor.
Yeah.
So that's part of the reason why I asked, but at the same time, you don't want to exclude anyone. But the more demographic information we gather,
Yeah.
the more uncomfortable it is to ask them.
Well, this comes back to the question of is the demographic data tied to the responses, or is it just for us to figure out representative nature of it? or
And
not?
we can say it, but it's always tied to in the back end,
Right.
it's always tied, but.
We can, yeah.
I would assume kids are not going to be doing a survey. Their parents are probably going to do it for them,
Yeah,
or at least reflect the family's importance. So I think just maybe if we even wanted to do that, asking, do you have a household with children?
yeah.
That utilize the library, yes, no. Like if I filled out the survey, I would be answering it considering my entire household, not just myself.
So
I would not be like, here you go, my 10-year-old, can you do like a 10 question search? She would not do it.
So
I don't think you need to either.
Do
You have a household with family, and that's, they check really don't.
I'm gonna say one other thing. And then I promise I'm gonna do whatever works best with demographics. So when we start getting into these things, like, do you live in a household with children? Sometimes it's exclusionary because we're not asking if you live in a house with someone that is homebound, a senior that you're caretaking for, someone with a disability. So it feels like we're prioritizing traditional families with minor children over those who are doing other unconventional family things or have caregiving roles or things like that. So
Household with children or homebound residents.
Yeah, those are different populations that I would expect to end up with different, like, I wouldn't, that's like grouping that together is, if we're getting lots of families with children, I don't think that's going to be representative of the needs of people who are, homebound adults or whatever, and vice versa. So I don't think it.
Household.
So
I mean, that's.
what I'm asking is the
that's-
way we ask questions shows what our priorities are.
Yeah.
Like, that's just how it shakes out when you read something. So I just don't want it to be a misreading that our only important category is whether or not you have children at home.
So the way you could do that without it being exclusionary is you have a couple of those things reflected. And the question is, does your household reflect any of the following? Minor children in the household, homebound, whatever things that you would want to capture there. So it's not necessarily excluding anybody. It's just saying, do you have one of these things? If we cared to do that, I'm.
Yeah,
fine
I
with
mean,
that.
I don't know. No, I hear what you're saying there, and that is an argument toward just keeping this as, stripped down and simple as possible. I mean, if we just collect age on everyone, then that's like a very simple and.
And it's a relatively innocuous thing to
Yeah.
collect, I
Like I
mean,
said, the parents are probably gonna answer for the kids, so if they
Yeah.
prioritize any kind of children's programming and you're
Yeah.
a 40-year-old
I do think
person,
we probably
we're
will
gonna assume you have a kid.
give these, well, maybe, I'm checking that 40 to 50 category and don't have kids and I'm still gonna.
Could we break it like that though, ages in your household, so you can,
Your age and ages in your household.
yeah, so I would, my age, my husband's age, and then, the kids, what, if they're with you, how old they are. Whereas that two, and if they're not, so if my mother lived with me, I would have her age
You would
there.
have a, yeah.
But what if they fill out the survey? Separately, the husband, the wife, and the grandma, they all fill out the survey, and they all fill in that information. It's gonna be,
I mean, I appreciate what you're saying, and it's a way to get around like the awkwardness.
like
of
the
it.
idea of.
I would say either do it that way or don't do it at all, since this is a long-range planning thing and not like a
Yeah.
audit, or we're not looking just for data points. I think those two that we originally started out with, I think are good enough to get us on the right path to
So
like
current use of the library and age.
and age and leave it at that. And if we cared enough to go even more granular, I would say, do you have any of the following reflected in your household? Blah, 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 blah. That's out, but I see less value in that since this is more big picture type stuff versus like we're just collecting data. If we were doing like an audit, I would say that's important. Like an audit for library use or something. That's my opinion. I feel like people be less enthused to answer that question than just like age checkbox.
Yeah,
and-
and like the age thing is a pretty, but it will give us, if we do have somebody that's do either of you happen to know, do the teens that come to teen programming fill out evaluation forms? Like, will they do it? Do you know? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put you on the spot. I just didn't.
Anecdotally, what I've heard is it's a struggle.
Okay.
And often
Not
the
shocking.
survey's two-sided. They'll often fill out one side, skip the back side. That was one of the bits of feedback we got, is make the surveys one-sided.
In general, and I'm sure you all recognize this, the people that fill out the survey are going to be people that passionately care about the library and want their voices heard, and people that are very unhappy with the library and want their voices heard. Most middle grade users won't complete the survey. I mean, that's just how it always shakes out. So what can happen in the meantime between now and our next meeting? Are we okay with doing a little bit of work on this offline, just on getting together the language and everything from the survey?
I think that would be good just to keep this moving along.
Yes, thank you. Anybody want to say no?
No, I think we should
Okay.
start building the survey for sure.
So what I would say is, do we want to keep this in Google Forms, which is consistent with the back end of Gilderland? Or do we want to use a tool that has a little bit more features to it, but is not connected to the library, though the raw data can be shared with the library?
Would we have to pay for it?
No.
I have an account.
I would prefer to use the stronger tool.
Yeah.
You all internally coming from Gilderland have a different thought?
Electronically, I'm thinking of the user end, and I don't think it would matter much to people who are comfortable which electronic tool we use. But are we planning to have any paper copies available?
Yes.
Okay.
I think we have to figure out what it looks like once we get it designed, because it's gonna be a little different, but certainly we're gonna have to.
Skip ahead.
Please flip to
Oh,
page
yes.
7. Yeah, oh God.
I'm slightly biased because anytime I've had to do a Google form thing on my phone, it's almost always a nightmare for some reason. And I have a Google email, so a Gmail, I don't
Google
understand.
Forms always has issues.
So
Okay.
whatever one's more mobile friendly, because I have a sneaky suspicion a lot of people.
Ours is mobile friendly, and even once the survey is set up, you can view what it looks like in mobile before you send it.
Yeah,
So
because
that's like a key feature. So what I can do is, I am doing absolutely nothing this week because it's my work conference week. But what I can do next week is set this up, the basic outline. And then like for what the survey might look like for everybody to look back through. Perhaps what we just need right now is a Google Doc for us to refine these categories just a little bit more. So I can just start one, share it with everybody. I'm not going to put a GPL restriction on it because that's part of what probably struggles when you connect to it. So like it may connect to your personal account. you can change accounts. But for us to work on coming up like a little bit of plain language, adding in additional things, because obviously I know that you guys know a lot more about like other collection stuff that should get added into here for people to prioritize so that that can get loaded. Does that sound like a reasonable plan? Pete, would it be possible to share with us like the list of community partners that this might go out to?
Yes, I was actually going to suggest that I start building that document and then other people can fill them in if they know groups.
Yeah.
No,
If there is no long-range planning folder, I don't know if there is, but if there's not, I'm gonna create one in Google. So that way we can be dropping things in the same. Is everybody okay with using Google for like us to collaborate offline?
Okay.
Okay.
We do the staff or board follow-up activity with it.
We did not even get to that. Yeah. What do we want to do?
Were we hoping for that for the next meeting or the meeting after?
Um,
Are we in a rush? Because I think the community part's gonna take a little bit anyway, minute.
the question is, do we want to circle back with community responses to the staff and the board? And have them do an activity based on that, or whether or not we just want to have them do an activity based on the cumulative responses of those two groups? I think that's the big question.
so something we've been prioritizing is being community focused with our thought process. And I think this would help build on that, that if we waited until we had some community response to respond to, it'll help put the board and staff in that mindset. Instead of, right now, if they're just responding to their own feedback, it's a little bit insular.
Yeah, I'm good with that.
So, okay,
So we would do it after we started gathering community.
yeah, I think
feedback?
so.
Okay.
Thank you for checking me and saying you had other things on the agenda essentially.
Well, it was more just, we had, this is just the data from
That,
our original
yeah,
season.
absolutely.
It's not prioritized by anyone.
No,
It's just, we just said, where would this
and so
fit best?
feel free to solicit other feedback, like talk to your, I can never remember your department names, your like collections folks, or whoever you want to talk to and say like, what are the other, we all think about it differently, so. That work? Okay, so we're gonna have that stuff. I'm gonna start creating these things and have them to you early next week. And then we will work on it so that we feel prepped and ready to go to finalize and launch the survey at our next meeting, which is May something. Probably
May 6th.
May 6th. Perfect. Okay, are we comfortable? Okay, thank you.
Thanks for.